Hey everyone, so this is Neil Young Countdown Part 4. So I made 3 videos prior to this, counting down all of Neil Young's studio records, which has become quite the undertaking, as you might imagine, because he adds new ones. He actually added one between the last video and this one called Chrome Dreams, which I believe is coming out at the end of August. So I will have wrapped these up by then, although I'm certain to probably take a look at that one down the road too. That's another archives release from an unreleased record, legendary unreleased record from 1977. But this countdown begins with number 18 on my list. This is an album that he did in 2010. Not one of his best decades, the 2010s, but this record was a great way to kick it off. And it is an album he recorded, kind of a very unique album actually for Neil Young, because he has an outside producer that has not used before, and he doesn't tend to rely on outside producers that are not regular Neil Young producers. I'm thinking like Nico Bolas or especially David Briggs, but he collaborated, and that's probably the key word, collaborated with Daniel Lanois on a record in 2010 where it was built around, he had done some solo acoustic tours and had a new batch of songs and wanted to get them down, but rather than just doing like a normal acoustic record, this one is based a lot on capturing the vibe of Neil Young late at night, full moon, in Daniel Lanois' New Orleans mansion, and then having Daniel Lanois sort of manipulate the sound through loops, through feedback, through echoes, and it's a very unique record in his collection. I mean, there's other records that sustain a mood like that, whether it be a really noisy record, like Ragged Glory, or something stripped down, like well, we talked about Hitchhiker, right, where it's just him and an acoustic guitar. This one, is quite different. Lanois came out in 2010, and it's got a really good batch of songs. I tend to really like this record. That's why I've rated it so high. It's got Angry World, Lovin' War, which I believe was the original title of the record before he changed it to Lanois. The first couple songs just kind of take you right in there. There's a version of Hitchhiking, or Hitchhiker rather, that came out later on an album called Hitchhiker, which I just referenced, years after it was written, and years after it even came out on this record, which it was written in like the mid 70s and was released on this record in 2010. And it's kind of a different version. I prefer the original better, but this version of Hitchhiker goes right along with the rest of the record, and it's one of the stronger points towards the end. Peaceful Valley is probably my favorite. Peaceful Valley Boulevard is probably my favorite song on the record, but it sustains a really nice mood. Um, I think it's a great late night record, and it's got one of the strongest batches of songs he'd had in a while. So yeah, props up to Lanois, um, Neil Young's record that I have coming in at number 18, and I was about to say what number of record it was in his career, and I just cannot do that right now. It's a little tricky. So the next one that I'm going to review is a record that he did right at the turn of the century, actually. Now, this is a record that came out in 2000. So I believe it was recorded in 1999, but it came out in 2000, called Silver and Gold. This is another Neil Young record, much in the vein of Harvest or Comes a Time, or the recent record that we talked about that keep coming back to, Hitchhiker, where it's very stripped down, kind of country. Although I would say this one has less of that, and it's more just kind of a stripped down record of him acoustic, with not nearly as many production touches as you had on something like Harvest. But it's a great batch of songs. I happened to see him live on this tour also, so that my memories kind of go hand in hand with seeing him live on this tour and also this record. He also did a record with CSNY right around the same time called Looking Back, and he let them pick the songs they wanted from these sessions to record as or this batch of songs to record as a new CSNY record. So there's songs like Looking Back, which is the title track of that record, that are not on here and kind of form a larger picture when you see like a concert video of this, which he had. Slowpoke was another one. But I mean, there's great songs in here. And Good to See You Again, I think, just kind of sets the mood for it. Silver and Gold was a song he'd been working on for a long time. Sentimental songs like Buffalo Springfield Again. Another song he'd been working on forever called Razor Love, or it had, I think, since '82 lying around. And it's fresh recordings on all this, so it has a seamless kind of vibe to it. It's a great record to put on, while you're having dinner. Just kind of, it's going to not offend anybody. It's not loud at all. It's just a very good singer-songwriter record from Neil. Silver and Gold. Number 16 is a record I just referenced called Comes a Time. This record came out in 1978. This is a record that initially didn't do much of anything for me. I got into Neil through Rust Never Sleeps, then Harvest, after the Gold Rush, and then the early 90s stuff like Harvest Moon and Ragged Glory and Freedom. But this album, I think I felt like it was overly produced. It was always a little jarring for me to listen to live Rust and hear a lot of love on it, because I associate that with, I believe it was, Linda Ronstadt, I think, or Nicolette Larson, that did a cover of that song, and I remember it from being a little kid. So it was weird to think that Neil Young wrote that record, and I think there's just something about it that kind of made me resist it, or just think it was a very average record. Listening to it again a few times, starting with like a year ago, I kind of got into this more. It's a very good record, as most of you know. And I judged it unfairly. It's also another record that I think he had some issues with a cover or something, and he yanked it and changed things around. It sustains the mood very, very well. It's much more produced, kind of like Harvest, than Silver and Gold. But it's got songs, of course, Comes a Time, Look Out for My Love, Lot of Love, which I just talked about. Great cover of Four Strong Winds. I believe Already Won It. It was a highlight for me listening to it. Kind of a romance song, a very romantic song about, I believe, his wife. He had met her right around that time. So anyway, Peggy. I believe that song's heavily influenced by her. But a great record, put on just, a Sunday morning kind of record. Comes a Time. Now at number 15 on my list, so we're getting into the, top 15 here, is an album that he did with Crazy Horse towards the end of the 90s that is fairly divisive for a lot of people. This is an album called Broken Arrow. I don't have the actual booklet. I might. Do I have the CD? I have some CDs here now. Of some, just when I say CDs, I mean just CDs, because most of my CDs were destroyed or sold. So anyway. But Broken Arrow, I tend to like a lot. It sets a mood to me that says summer. I mean, I put that record on and I'm instantly in the summertime. And I'm not always a guy that associates records with seasons, but boy, does that record do it for me. I did see him on the Horde Festival tour. I believe it was Horde with Beck and some other bands in Somerset, Wisconsin, back in that same summer of 1997. So that might have something to do with my memories around this too, much like seeing him live with just solo around the time of Silver and Gold did the same thing. But that doesn't really create a seasonal vibe, but boy, Broken Arrow sure does. Broken Arrow's got some great songs on it. The problem is you have to listen to 3 very, very long, almost very jammy songs to get there. Not that they're bad songs. I mean, I think Big Time is great. And I don't mind that one going on a little bit. But when you get to a song like Loose Change, it's just, they're not even doing anything that interesting. It just kind of plods along. There's like instrumental sections that just repeat the same thing. It gets very, very tedious. And it was an album when listening to in the car, driving around, and getting ready for this series, that sometimes I just could not get through one of those first 3 songs, especially Loose Change. But it does get better. I mean, it got Scattered on it, which is a great song. And just the album as a whole does work. I think it would probably work better if you just have it in the background and then you perk up a little bit when the really good songs come on. But it is an album full of really great songs. In addition to Scattered, Music Arcade is a absolutely stellar song as well. Those 2 songs, Scattered, Music Arcade, Big Time, really make the record. It is a really good Crazy Horse record, like I said, it just gets a little too jammy, although some people probably don't mind that. I think that's what turns people off, though. You really have to get through a lot of jamming to kind of get into the more songs, besides Big Time. But it also has a cover that I think was part of the divisiveness, a Jimmy Reed song called "Baby, What You Want Me to Do," I think, and it's just an audience cassette, probably version, somebody just taping it in the audience. It does not sound very good at all, and I don't think it's even that great of a performance. It doesn't do much of anything for me. I'm not sure why he put that on the record. The record is short on songs, but it's still quite long. It comes in at 47 minutes with that song, so without it, it still would have been a decent length album. This is also the first album, though, that he made after his producer, legendary producer David Briggs, who'd been with him for most of his records, had passed away. So I think he was in a little bit in uncharted territory. My guess is someone like Briggs would have said, hey, why don't you trim some of those songs a little bit? And hey, I don't know if we really need that cover at the end, but that's just my guess. Coming in at 14 is an interesting record. This was like kind of at the height of my really getting into Neil Young, although I've had several stages, and in fact, the last 10 years I've probably gotten into him in some ways more than I ever have. But when I was looking forward very much to everything he did, new, not so much archival stuff, and new, but back then new, because he was just on a roll. This record came out in 1995, and I'm putting it at number 14, and this is a collaboration he did with Pearl Jam, which is really interesting. It's like at the kind of the height of their popularity. They're battling Ticketmaster. They had put out their first three, and some would argue their best three records by that time. Vitology was only probably less than a year old. It came out in 1994. We had Versus and we had 10. And apparently he had played two pro-choice benefit shows with Pearl Jam, and they jammed together a little bit. And I know Pearl Jam had started to close with one of the songs on Sleeps with Angels close their set with a song called Piece of Crap, which I do think is kind of a piece of crap. But Pearl Jam just loved to cover that. I think they still cover it, but that might have had something to do with it. Anyway, they got together, but due to probably contract with Epic that Pearl Jam were under, he used them as a backing band, didn't credit them, and then Pearl Jam, a few months later, put out a little EP with two songs where it's Neil Young as part of the band and Vedder singing. On the album, there's just one duet with kind of a duet with Eddie called Peace and Love. But the album, and I still have the CDs, but the packaging's been destroyed. And I can't tell. I think this one is the one with Mirrorball, and I think this one is Merkinball, but I may have them backwards. But anyway, I like to keep these CDs around. I go drive, I grab a couple sometimes, especially on the Matador releases, which is a different subject. They don't even say what they are, so you're grabbing them, and I'm not sure, like, what is this Pavement? Never quite sure what I'm playing. But anyway, I think Mirrorball is a really strong record. Not maybe for the whole thing, but it's really strong for two songs, I think, in particular. And I played it, and I was just kind of amazed at how good it sounds. Vocally too, his vocals sound really good. I'm not a huge Pearl Jam fan, but there's an edge to it that is missing with Crazy Horse a lot of times. It's just like kind of energetic, momentous vibe going on, and it works so well for some of these songs. Song X and Act of Love were written apparently for that pro-choice benefit. And actually, Song X apparently he's doing live now, along with I'm the Ocean on his solo acoustic tour that he started since we started the series. But anyway, Song X, I'm not crazy about it all. It's okay. It's a nice way to start the record, I guess. But for me, the absolute best song on the record is Act of Love. As a pro-choice song, as a rock song, as a song that really shows off Neil's writing ability in kind of a different way, writing about something as specific as, somebody's decision or a couple's decision to terminate a pregnancy. And if there's another absolute highlight, maybe even better in some ways, probably on equal footing for different reasons, it's I'm the Ocean. I love that song from the beginning. Act of Love took me a little while, but I'm the Ocean it's like this kind of biographical song. He's speaking in first person. People my age, they don't do the things I do. And it's just really appropriate because now he's playing that live and he's so much older than he was when he recorded this. But there is a certain energy to the record that I find really contagious, even though it does go on, I think, a little too long. It would have been and a really good record had those two other songs that better fronted been part of it, and maybe they wrote a couple new songs to kind of, I don't know, make the whole thing a little bit tighter. Downtown is a great single though too. You know, some people are like, oh, it's kind of a dumb song or whatever. Hey, in summer or whatever, you hear that on the radio, you're probably gonna turn it up. It's a cool song. But yeah, it's kind of suffers from what some Neil Young records suffer from, which is he would bang them out very, very quickly. Did these shows with Pearl Jam, booked a little time in the studio, had some songs written, did it, and was done. But it's still a really good record. I think it's probably one of the more underrated ones. I think if it said Crazy Horse on it, it might have done a little bit better, but it would have sounded quite different. Oh, and before I forget, here's what the album cover looked like. He's going to put all these out. I know he just announced a box set that has Ragged Glory and Weld along with Arc, all released on vinyl, one big set. I think he's probably going to sell them individually, and I would imagine there's going to be a release campaign to reissue all these records, including Mirrorball. But next on my list is one that a lot of people probably would say for the top 10. Some people just absolutely love this record. I never did. You know, I never saw it quite the way that some other people did. It was a crazy and good, intense comeback for Neil Young and Crazy Horse, and it sounds amazing. Probably another summer record. You know, you put this on in a car, you crank it up. I don't know, if you're out in the country and you have a barn and you want to do like the barn thing that Neil does where you're floating down the water and you've got one speaker left in one barn and the right speaker right in another barn, and you're yelling more barn or more left, more right, whatever. It would sound amazing. It is the sound of a band being kind of reborn. Grunge had happened. They were seeing, as especially Neil, as like godfather of grunge. It had been quite a few years since Crazy Horse had made a really good record. Some would argue not since Rust Never Sleeps. I would argue that you've got to consider Reactor in there. But other than that, I mean, the 80s Life was not a very good Crazy Horse record at all. But this is, I was pleasantly surprised when I listened to it again, because my issue with Ragged Glory is that I never want to hear any of those songs live. I know that sounds bad, and I had Weld and I liked it at the time, but I just don't get into the actual songs that much. Country Home, I think, works okay. White Lion I liked better in its earlier versions that date back to the 70s. Over and Over, Love to Burn, Days It Used to Be, they all kind of go together for me under this cloud of fuzz, which is pretty kick-ass hearing a band jam out like that. Mansion on the Hill, but I don't know. In my mind, at least when I was like 17, when this came out and I was listening to it, or 18, they sounded like a bunch of old men. Or Neil sounded old. He didn't sound as good to me as he did on the previous album, Freedom. I liked it. I liked Weld better, but I must say, going back and listening to it, if I'm in right mood and put this on, it's about the I would say style over substance. It sounds great, and sometimes the individual songs matter less than the whole. So that's why I'm rating it at number 13, Ragged Glory from 1990. Oh, and it very much looks like what it sounds like. It's like you're in that room with them, or maybe from a distance, because it's probably going to blow your ears out. At number 12 is an album I just referenced called Freedom. This came out in 1989. People know it best from two versions, well, one in particular, of Rockin' in the Free World. A lot like Tonight's the Night and Rust Never Sleeps, he bookended this album with two versions of the same song, an acoustic one and an electric one. So he opens up with an acoustic version of Rockin' in the Free World that nobody had really heard before, but by the end of it, the audience is singing along. And at the end of it, the end of the record, I believe, is just a live or a studio version of "Rockin' the Free World." That is the one that everybody knows of. And it is a great song. It's a great song for the time. I mean, that's an example for me, like why it's a better record than Ragged Glory, because you have songs that really connect off of Freedom. A lot of the songs are written way before the album came out. This is another record that was compiled from different sources. Some of the sessions date back to 1988. I believe he's still under contract with Geffen. Maybe he saved them for this record, and I think even 87. But it works pretty well as a whole. It's kind of like a best of Neil 80s record almost. That's what it seems like, even though some of the songs go back to the 70s. Don't Cry. I love that song. I love the guitar just kind of coming out of nowhere and crashing down in it. Zero or Crime in the City is 60 to 0. Great song. It was featured really well in Weld. One of the longest song on this. Hang on a Limb, great kind of middle of the road harvest type song, featuring Emmylou Harris. Great song. Wrecking Ball's on here, another really good song that Emmylou Harris ended up doing on her own. Too Far Gone, a song that dates back to the 70s. There's just a sense that he's onto something with this record, that he's back. There's none of that 80s production technique really getting in the way. I mean, some would argue it's still on there, but it certainly doesn't get in the way at all. It sounded really fresh to me. I hadn't listened to it in years, even though it was one of those that I had on pretty regular kind of rotation back in the early 90s. I just had not listened to it in probably since the early 90s. Freedom. You can see the damage that was done when all my CDs were flooded, but still plays. At number 11 is a record that I became aware of when I was on a road trip. I was visiting a friend in Kansas City, where I used to live, and the new Rolling Stone had come out. This is 1994, so this is before you would learn everything on the internet way ahead of time. But I read a Rolling Stone review that Neil Young had a new record out, and it was called Sleeps with Angels, and the review made me so excited to hear it. I can't remember if it was out when I read that review or if I had to wait a few weeks. I think I might have had to wait. I think it might have been, usually the magazine would come out a little bit ahead of time. But I just could not wait to hear this record just based on the review of the album. And I wasn't disappointed at all when I got it. It is one of those Neil records I hardly ever play. I didn't really play it that much at the time either, but it is one of his best records in my opinion. It's like a sequel to Tonight's a Night in a way, much wiser, later, older Neil Young. But he's tackling some big subjects, mortality, some depressing things on there, kind of disillusionment. He's got a lot of songs that sort of pick up later on themes he started before. It seems like he's really trying to create a very cohesive piece. And I think part of the issue, not an issue, but part of the reason maybe I didn't listen to it that much over the years might be the fact that the title song is written about Kurt Cobain, and he had died just before this record came out. And my understanding this whole time was that this was a song cycle largely inspired by his death. Now, when I go back and look at the archives and looked at the recording dates of these songs, it's simply not true. All of them were recorded in late 93, well before anything happened to Kurt. And only one song, Sleeps with Angels, was recorded in 94 after Kurt died. So that painted it in a little bit of a different picture, and that's when I was recently able to really pick up on some themes there that I didn't really get before. Some of the song titles seem kind of cheesy, like Drive By, Trans Am, Safeway Cart, but if you really listen to them, they're really quite good songs. Some of the melodies kind of repeat. Like a song like Western Hero and Train of Love are actually the same music, just different lyrics. I think they're different takes too, but you definitely have a feeling of themes being picked up here and repeated quite a bit. It is a darker record, even without it, the whole thing being about Kurt Cobain. But I found it quite beautiful in a way that I hadn't really experienced before. It's still not one you're going to play at a party and really crank up. I mean, Change Your Mind is great. It is one of those the long Crazy Horse kind of song that really really works. I think partly because it just has this repeating chorus. It keeps coming back and kind of changes every time you kind of repeats it. Change Your Mind. Really in a different light when you review it, kind of through a relationship lens rather than Kurt Cobain. For me anyway. Maybe most people got that right. I didn't. And it is also some of my favorite Neil Young records. Most of them are the ones that are in between. They're not all acoustic or Nashville kind of alt country, or before the word country-ish albums, or they're not all like Hands on Deck, Ragged Glory, full out rock records. Are the ones that are quite often in the middle. And I love the ones that kind of can sustain a mood. And this one is a prime example. It's Crazy Horse. It's kind of in the middle. It's them restrained, really serving the songs, and it works really, really well. If you haven't heard it in a while, I suggest giving it a chance. It's Sleeps with Angels from 1994. Okay, we're at number 10, and I thought even before doing this video, hey, maybe I should just make this a top 10 the next video and not talk about this record, or I should say these records. This is, I'm embarrassed to say so, another screw up on my part by not counting correctly. I am not a mathematician. I am not good at math. You do not want me to be enlisted for anything that really involves math. I'm just not that good at it. But to my defense, I will say his catalog is extremely tricky when you have all these archive releases coming out. I think originally I wasn't going to include them, and then I decided to, and I was going and looking, consulting different people's album numbers of Neil studio records, and I think I got confused somewhere along the line. And Freedom had dropped out, which it needs to be in there, so I added it back in. But also, I kind of thought about grouping these two records together anyway, because I had a really, really hard time figuring out which one's better. And you have to, and I know which one's better now, I must say, and I'll get to that. But I think you have to suspend belief a little bit and pretend that certain records didn't exist in your, and it's hard to do because you're used to these records. You're used to part one of what comes in at number 10 for me. Used to hearing this crazy record called American Stars and Bars with a ridiculous cover and sort of a more conservative one on the back, or I'm trying to remember which is the front. The spine, judging by the spine, the record goes like this. And it kind of sounds like this. It's pretty chaotic. One song, one side, the first side was newly redone. It was new sessions, much in the Comes a Time kind of Harvest sort of vibe. But the second side was compiled of much older songs. So you've got Neil Young, Crazy Horse, and the Bullets on side one, and they're doing a bunch of songs that are kind of more stripped down. Songs that I wouldn't necessarily put in with the best songs that Neil has recorded. So the second side is all different sources. 74, 76, 75, and the second side is great. I mean, Star of Bethlehem's great. Will to Love is fantastic. This crazy kind of epic, more acoustic song. I think it's just him playing acoustic guitar by the fireplace, singing about a salmon fighting to work its way upstream, kind of a metaphor for love or something. It works if you don't think about it too hard. And then of course Like a Hurricane, which is a masterpiece. So this album is a really hodgepodge record. I think it's probably one of the worst examples of him kind of putting together things from different sessions. But how can you turn away an album that has Will to Love and Like a Hurricane, even if it has some kind of nonsense songs like Bite the Bullet? So American Stars and Bars is still, it's got its charm because it is sort of a Neil Young classic record that people sort of forget about, or from that classic period. But the album that I'm pairing it with is much, much better. And the only reason I had a hard time is just figuring out, like, okay, if American Stars and Bars never existed, how would I rank this? It would definitely be where it's at, maybe even further up on my list. It's just that maybe you don't have much history with it. Don't. It seems like a little unfair to rank it super high, but Homegrown, which also I think would have been part of the Ditch trilogy, or maybe expand it to 4 if this was originally released instead of Tonight's a Night as a follow-up to On the Beach. Just really, really interesting. Or no, actually, On the Beach would come afterwards. I get a little confused on all this. No, On the Beach would have still come before this. This would have been the follow-up to On the Beach. And it's got great songs that have been in the archives or hidden. Most people, I don't think, even realize they existed for a long time, like Separate Ways, Try, especially Vacancy on the second side. It's got a version of what later showed up on Ragged Glory of White Line. Star of Bethlehem from American Stars and Bars is on here. So is Homegrown. And so is Love is a Rose? No, Love is a Rose was just a single. So it's got enough different songs that's not a direct lift from American Stars and Bars, but there's enough crossover where, had this been released, American Stars and Bars would look quite different. And I'm going to go through like a whole catalog of Neil's stuff once, or not whole catalog, but like the 3 or 4 records, including Chrome Dreams, which is coming out, and just kind of play with an alternative timeline of what this would actually look like if the records came out that way or different orders, and how it would have impacted records down the line. Especially the album Hitchhiker and Chrome Dreams, which is coming out, would definitely impact any kind of version of Rust Never Sleeps. But this is a really good record. It sustains the mood really nicely. It does have some strange songs like Florida and We Don't Smoke It No More. Florida's lyrics are actually on the insert for On the Beach, which is pretty interesting. And it's kind of a downer record. It was recorded after his breakup with Carrie Snodgrass. Neil sometimes just does not... The times when he seems to hold up records, a lot of times is after he writes very personal things, and they're probably so personal he doesn't want to release them, including this record. Carrie passed away a while ago. I think that might have something to do with it. He's older, he's looking back, and he put out this gem of a record, which I think is great. It is definitely an essential Neil Young record now. But I guess he just felt more comfortable looking back, putting it out, kind of like Toast. I mean, both records show, the end of a relationship through his eyes. But yeah, this is number 10, along with American Stars and Bars, Homegrown. Introduction to those that don't know it of the Neil Young archives. I'm on the cabinet feature, which is probably my favorite because you can just scroll down through all these different years and see details about songs, what albums they ended up on, live recordings, songs that are unreleased, songs that ended up on the archive series. And it continually changes as he finds new versions of things he forgot about, or people write in with links to, or sharing a bootleg that he decides to press on vinyl or share here. But you can see, like, go back to On the Beach. Okay, this came out in July of '74. Then after that, he did this. He recorded a show at the Bottom End that came out as Citizen Kane Jr. Blues recently as an official bootleg. He takes an attempt at Love's a Rose, and this is the one that ends up on Decade and Homegrown. So Homegrown, of course, was released years and years and years later, but Love's a Rose came out first on Decade. He does this CSNY, like Greatest Hits album, and then he also does a live album that comes out much later called CSNY 74, and that's where most of these come from. Although he's got starting to do outtakes like Daughters that from sessions that came out much later. Separate Ways here. This came out on Homegrown a few years ago, but originally recorded on December 11th, 1974. Then he was going to put out the album Homegrown, but of course he cancels it. He does a bunch of recordings for what end up being on Zuma, including some of these songs like Kansas that were on Homegrown, but he must have wanted to try it with Crazy Horse instead. And then he records Too Far Gone, which of course ended up on Freedom. years later. Actually, it's a different recording, but he tried it back then. Then you see him do, he does this live album with Crazy Horse, comes out much later, of course. Records a few songs here. Does stuff with Stephen Stills, which we're probably not going to get into. And then he has this other recording session where he does Pocahontas and Powderfinger, and it's all like one recording session that ends up being Hitchhiker, which comes out much later. Then he goes, there's a live album again. Chrome Dreams was supposed to come out. If you look at Chrome Dreams, it had like a hurricane on it. Then Chrome Dreams gets canceled. He goes and records 5 songs, which we talked about, makes up the first side 1 of American Stars and Bars. But for side 2, he draws on some of those previous sessions, like Star of Bethlehem, Will to Love, and of course Like a Hurricane, and Homegrown. So anyway, I think it's just kind of fascinating to look at this, and I think I'll probably do another video when Chrome Dreams comes out to sort of go through it in more detail about their various sessions. But yeah, this is Neil Young Archives. Thanks, everyone.